When I go to see a show, I want to identify with the protagonist, the main character. I want to know what his journey is about. I want to know he or she, what they're going through. What can I take away from that will affect my life? And I think that as a performer, when I started working on this show, after 16 years of doing only ensemble work, that was a major epiphany for me. That I was doing all this very self-indulgent. It seemed very selfish.
Yes.
And I really felt, I was telling my director, I said, who's going to be interested in my story?
Who cares about this?
And what I found out was the more personal I went with my story, the more universal it was for other people.
Yes. Now, you talked about starting to work on your piece. Can you think of that first impulse? What came upon you to think, I'm going to write a piece about my life, about my father? What was it that sparked that interest in doing that?
It was a very poignant moment, actually. I had just turned 44. I was living in Los Angeles, and I was doing this exercise from a book that I was reading called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And I was doing this exercise it was called Morning Pages, and it was basically a free writing exercise that I would do every morning. And what kept coming up for me was my father. In some way, I was writing a lot about my relationship or lack of relationship with my father, and particularly the scene of meeting my father, and because that was the only time I ever had any kind of a memory of him, as vague as it was, and of course not even being conscious of it at the time.
Sure.
So trying to piece together that memory became a writing exercise for me. And it really came out of my subconscious. But through that exercise, I actually started to recreate that scene. I told some theater friends about it. They suggested, why don't you write a play about it? Sounded like a good idea to me. Yes. So then the rest is history.
So, that's wonderful. Yeah. How do you go about developing a work like this?
Well, I did a lot of writing on my own. Writing's a very lonely art form. I love it, but it's very, very solitary. And so there was a lot of experimentation writing on my own. But at some point, I needed to have some feedback from other people. And I was lucky enough to join a writer's workshop and to be accepted as an artist in residence with the Z-Space Theater Lab, as it existed then, back in the late 90s. So I was surrounded on a weekly basis by some other writer-performers who were also working on pieces, and we gave each other feedback. So it was great because I could go in there with new material, and of course, it's nothing like having a deadline. People say, well, when we see you next week, you're going to have something new, right? So I had to walk in every week. I had to feel like I had to have something new.
Right.
And it was great because I was getting not only just feedback, but I was getting artistic feedback from people who knew their stuff. Then I was lucky enough to have workshop productions, yours being one of them, where I could have an audience to give me feedback and to tell me from a lay person's point of view what they liked and what they disliked. And so my play evolved over the years. I mean, even people who have seen earlier versions of my show, which a lot of your audience probably has seen at least one of the 3 workshop productions that I did, or maybe even the professional debut, which was a couple of years ago at the Berkeley Marsh. The show has evolved even from then because of feedback that I've gotten from artists and from the audience itself. So it's been a real evolving process for me, and I'm very thankful for that.
Great. Now, you've mentioned Z-Space a couple of times.
Yeah.
For the members who may not be familiar with Z-Space, it's a wonderful arts organization that works towards helping artists grow and develop, but also helps artists develop pieces and works to take from their beginning onto the stage. And a number of artists have gone through Z-Space and developed works that are quite significant at this point. So Z-Space is another seminal arts organization here in San Francisco. Now, Walk and Talk and Bill Hawkins is going to take place February the 14th through March the 2nd, and it's going to be at the African American Art and Culture Complex, which is at 762 Fulton Street.
Yeah.
In terms of Walk and Talking, what are you wanting your audience to leave with? Or what message or what thoughts, when they leave, what do you want them to be thinking? If that's a good question
sure,
to
it's
ask.
a great question. It's a great question. And I do want to mention that the opening is actually the 15th.
Correct.
The preview's on the 14th, but you're welcome to come to the preview. No question. But yeah, first of all, there's such a wonderful legacy of black radio. I mean, radio today, it has no resemblance to what you and I grew up with. It hasn't resembled that radio for a couple of decades now, actually. And as you and I know, it was a very colorful period. And I'm talking about the late 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, and the early 70s, when I remember it kind of changing for what it started to evolve into what we have today in radio. And just in terms of the legacy that black disc jockeys had in creating that radio, the style of what they call the presentational or the personality DJ.
Yes.
The DJs that were known as much for their presentation as much as for the music that they played.
Right.
And the black disc jockeys at the time were really phenomenal. My father was one of them. They were known for their rhyming style. They were known for, for their connection to the community. You could turn on your radio and you'd find out about what was happening. Not just who shot John, but you'd also find out who was running for the latest office here. The latest political news, where you could shop, where you're going to be welcomed from the African American community. They had black sponsors as well as white sponsors. So it was really a phenomenal connection to the black community.
Yes.
But their style is what I miss the most, because when you listen to the radio today, the music, yeah, we can talk about the music. That's a whole other story. But in terms of who introduces the music to you, and listening to when you listen to the radio back in those days, you knew you were listening from that person to the personal taste of that disc jockey.
It was like they were celebrities.
Yeah, they were celebrities.
But they had their own way, and each one was a little bit different.
Yeah.
And in some ways, there was some competition about who was best or good at the different styles.
Absolutely, yes.
Thinking in terms of that, could you give us a little taste, maybe, of what radio may have sounded like then?
Well, you just want the little excerpt of it?
Yes.
Because I, as I mentioned to you, I had a number of interviews that I did with some people, and I created some composite characters from these interviews. So one of the characters that I met was I met him in Burger King. And he imitated my father.
Okay.
And he insisted that I meet him in Burger King. And he gave me one imitation that I put into the show, and it was something like this. Hey, Cleveland, all you hip cats and chicks gather round. It's time to dig the sounds of the man with the plan. This is Walking and Talking. Bill Hawkins, walking my walk and talking my talk. Back on the scene with my record machine, broadcasting live from the record shop on 105. Ho! It cracked me up when I heard it, and that style, the DJs were stealing rhyme, sliding and gliding, moving and grooving, all that stuff. It was being stolen left and right from DJs who all wanted to be hip. You know what I mean? And my father was a Pullman's porter. So he would travel from city to city. I mean, he used to travel on a train between Cleveland and Chicago and go through Detroit. So he got familiar with all the styles of the DJs of all those markets.
Okay. Yeah. And he also had some influence on the DJs that followed him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All the generations of DJs, the black disc jockeys, and not just the black disc jockeys, who definitely have a lot to be indebted to in terms of my father's generation of disc jockeys, but the white disc jockeys as well.
Sure.
So
hearing that little taste,
yeah.
I'm sure members of the audience will want to definitely come see Walkin' Talkin', Bill Hawkins, In Search of My Father, at the African American Art and Culture Complex in San Francisco. And in terms of, you said that he had an effect on other DJs. What's been your experience in terms of the effect you've had on some of your audiences when you've performed the piece?
Well, usually what I get, the thing that comes up for me the most is people come out and they say, great show, not pat myself on the back. They was a great show. Now let me tell you my story. They always have, and I love it because they always have something from their personal lives that they can identify with from my story.
And that's part of the connection that we talked about a few moments ago.
Even if it's about a family secret,
yes,
or if it's about some absentee parent situation, but it touches people in a very personal way. That is the most gratifying for me, because going back to your earlier question, it's about personal stories. It's about personal storytelling. I think that's so healing for the teller and for the listener. And if my show can help to promote the idea of telling your story, I'm happy about that.
Wow. And the thing is that I've found through AfroSolo and through life is that we all have a story. We all have a number of stories. Coming to see Alan's show would be one way to see how that has evolved. And maybe it might spark someone in the audience to tell his or her story. That would be really, really nice.
I hope so.